A brutal conflict in Gaza, the Russia-Ukraine conflict continuing, high inflation and a cost of living crisis. These are just some of the issues that Europe and the world faced in 2023. As we enter the new year, we ask, will 2024 be any better? Hello and welcome to a special 2024 predictions edition of Roundtable. I'm Enda Brady. 2024 is set to be the biggest election year in history, with elections in the UK, United States and Russia, and votes held to elect the European Parliament. Will elections dominate the headlines in 2024? We first look at the expected 2024 UK election. Will the Conservative Party win again, or will Labour take power after 13 years out of office? We spoke to John Curtis, Professor of Politics at the University of Strathclyde, well known for his election predictions. We also spoke to the former UK Foreign Secretary, Jack Straw.
I think the first point to note is we probably can look forward to a year of almost endless election campaigning, because at the moment one has to say that the government is going to have to play it long, which probably means delaying the election to the autumn, October, or maybe even November of next year. As to the outcome, well, the truth is that almost undoubtedly we're looking at the prospect of Labour forming the next government. What I think we're still not entirely sure about is whether or not that's going to be a Labour government with a safe overall majority, or whether in the end we find that we end up the polls narrowing and Labour are having to run some kind of minority administration. That latter outcome is probably at the moment the best that the Conservatives can hope for.
John, are we looking at the kind of Labour victory Tony Blair saw in May 1997?
We could. Certainly if less the polls move, and they haven't moved in the last 12 months, then that is the kind of scenario that does potentially face the Conservatives. Indeed, they could well end up with even fewer seats than the 190 odd that they got in 1997. At the moment, one has to say the prospects for the Conservatives, given how far behind they are in the polls, given the state of the economy and given the state of the health service, the prospects don't look very promising at all.
Jack Straw, I'd like to ask your predictions for 2024 in British politics.
I'm always very pessimistic in predictions. Of course, I would like there to be a general election, although legally it doesn't have to happen until January 2025. And I would really love there to be a Labour victory after what will then be not only 14 years of Conservative rule, but just a chaotic period since Brexit, which will by next year have been eight dismal, chaotic, humiliating years for the UK. Whether that will happen, I just don't know. And one of the other things I learned in British politics, I mean, in the end, spending 23 years in opposition and 13 years in government, is that if you want to create a change and want to get into power, you mustn't ever count your chickens until they're hatched, and you've got to just carry on working for it, and always recognise that whether the Conservatives have been any good at running the country, they have a formidable electoral machine behind them and loads of money.
And do you think Keir Starmer will, at some point in 2024, walk into number 10 Downing Street?
I believe he should, and that if there's any justice in the world, he will. And I'm not in any doubt at all that he make by far and away the best Prime Minister of all available candidates for that position.
Can you see a day, Jack Straw, when Britain rejoins the European Union?
I can see a day when we get closer and closer into the European Union. I think it's probably take another generation before we were in the position where we decided to rejoin it. But one step at a time, in the words of the hymn.
The UK election predictions continue with the leader of the Vote True and Fair party, Gina Miller. She thinks the UK election will be in early 2024. Alan Duncan, former minister at the UK Foreign Office, thinks it will be later in the year. So, which of them will be correct? Gina Miller, 2024 coming, a huge year ahead in British politics. What's your prediction?
Gosh, I think that actually there will be an election earlier rather than later, because the Tory party have to lance the boil. They're going to lose, but why not go into the opposition benches and try and mend themselves? And I think they'll go into the opposition and they will go to the right. We'll either have Suella Braverman or Kemi Badenoch as leader of the opposition party, and they will be out of power for about a decade.
We're looking ahead to 2024. What do you think politics might bring our way in this new year?
I think in the UK it's going to be the year of the election, and so the campaigning is pretty well started. It'll be in September or October. There's no way that it can go beyond that, because you're not going to have an election campaign in November, December. But it's going to be a sort of pretty tedious political slog, where Labour will try not to make mistakes, and the Conservative government will be crying for attention and credibility, but they'll find it very difficult to get that. I think there'll be a bit of economic recovery, but I think people have really stopped thinking about details. I think they've made up their mind, and most of them just think of their politics in a broad brush way, and if they're just not happy with the government and the other lot looks all right, they'll say, time for a change, give the other lot a chance, and tell the current government to go away and sort itself out. And that, I think, is the mood at the moment. Whether that is going to change dramatically within the next 12 months is the big question. I suspect not, but I think the polls will close and it will begin to look like a bit of an exciting race.
Now we look at predictions for other big elections planned for the year, namely in the United States and the European Parliament. Will Donald Trump return to the White House? I spoke to Professor Klaus Lars. He is Professor of History and International Affairs at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Klaus, a huge year ahead in the United States. Who's going to win?
That's very difficult to say. At the moment, it looks like 50-50. It could be a victory for Trump, which is not impossible, but Biden could also just pull through. It really depends on 5 or 6 swing states. And in many of these swing states, Trump is actually ahead at the moment, though in Michigan and Wisconsin, it looks as if Biden was slightly ahead. And I think these swing states, they will be decisive in November 2024.
We've been following Trump's many legal battles. Every single week there's a problem. He seems to get an even bigger boost in the polls. Is that a fair assessment?
Yes, this is quite surprising. For many voters, Trump's legal problems don't seem to matter. Also, the uprising on Capitol Hill on 6 January 2021 doesn't seem to matter to many voters. Many Republicans think that that there's a witch hunt for him, that he is right, that the election was indeed stolen. They actually believe him. That, of course, does not apply to Democrats, to people who would support Biden, but many undecided voters and loyal Trump voters seem to give him the benefit of the doubt. To many who are not Republicans, who are not Trump fans, this is utterly surprising. However, the Trump followership is very, very loyal, it seems.
Is there any credence to the view that a country the size of the United States should be producing wannabe presidents who are younger, fitter, healthier, and have more energy than these two?
Indeed, I would fully agree with that, but that is not the view of the American voter so far regarding Trump. Gradually, you hear a few voices who also question Trump's age, and he is 77 right now. But for many people, Trump's age doesn't seem to matter. While they keep talking about Biden's age, and he is 3 to 4 years older, and Biden is on the defensive, and he has to justify his age. While so far Trump has gotten away with coming across perhaps more energetic, more dynamic, and age doesn't seem to matter.
And rumour has it that right-wing parties are set to make big gains at those European Parliament elections. Will the right win? The Italian politician Elena Lucaselli gave us her thoughts. Elena, looking ahead to 2024, what do you think is going to happen with European elections?
Well, I think that for sure there will be some changement in the composition of the parliament. And of course, then the commission will change also. I think that our party, which is the ECR, which is the Conservative Party, will grow. And this is because there's more understanding of our politics now that President Meloni is also the president of Italy.
And it's a big year ahead for Giorgia Meloni. What can we expect to see from her?
Well, for sure, she will go on in the type of politics that she's already doing. So all the big topics will be on the table, and she will face all the Italian problems as well as the European problems and try to have some answers. We are starting right now with the governance, with European governance, because the debate that we are having in Europe now, it's actually began with our president put on the table one of these problems with our financial laws in all Europe. And this will go on. We already start our immigration politics that is changing the way that in Europe it's understanding this big issue. And in the economy, she will go on pushing investments in all Europe, as well as helping all the European companies.
And looking ahead to the European elections, do you see more right-wing politicians, more populist leaders being successful, winning more seats?
Well, I don't think we are populist. I think we are conservative, which means a different thing for us. For sure, the politics in Europe is changing, and this is a fact. And I think that everybody in all Europe understand that having more strong country inside Europe make Europe more strong. And this is the goal that we want to achieve.
2023 saw the first in-person summit between the EU and China in 4 years, but the jury is still out on whether any concrete progress was actually made. Could 2024 see real change in relations between Brussels and Beijing? Jan Bennett is the co-director of the Paul and Marcia Wythe Centre on Contemporary China. This was her forecast for the year ahead. Jan, if I could ask you to get your crystal ball out and look towards 2024 EU-China relations, where do you see them going? Better, worse, or still the same?
I think it's dependent on two things. The first is Russia and its war of aggression on Ukraine. How that progresses, I think, will largely determine how the EU-China relationship improves or deteriorates. The second thing is climate change. China needs to make concrete steps towards climate change mitigation, as well as the EU. The EU accounts for 17% of global emissions, and China, I think, is the first or the second, the United States being the first. Those two things will determine how the relationship either improves or deteriorates.
Away from politics and now to one of the biggest issues for Europe, the energy crisis. Will energy prices and inflation continue to rise? And what about the biggest cause of this crisis, the Ukraine conflict? Will this end in 2024? And what impact could the Russian election have on Ukraine? I spoke to economist Vicky Price and Orysia Lutsevich, Deputy Director at the Russia and Eurasia Programme and head of the Ukraine Forum at Chatham House. Vicky Price, I want your predictions for 2024. First of all, tell me, what do you think might happen to the UK economy?
Well, it's very interesting you're asking this now, given that there is so much uncertainty around us because of Eastern Mediterranean events that are going on as we speak. So we don't know what's going to happen to the price of oil. We don't know what's going to happen to the price of gas. The indications are they're going up. And therefore, there is an issue as to whether we're going to have the problems again that we've had during the crisis with Ukraine and the energy price increases we saw then re-emerge. And that's the real question mark. But even without that, 2023 has been better than we thought, certainly for the UK and for most of Europe, except, of course, it's now falling into recession. The last quarter was pretty poor for Germany and for Europe as a whole. But 2024 should, in theory, if energy prices stabilize and inflation really does continue to come down, as interest rates have stayed up are staying up and they have increased so significantly, we might see that 2024 ends up being slightly better than 2023 for most of the world, not necessarily, though, for the UK, where inflation is probably going to be higher than in other places, where interest rates may stay up for longer than in other places, and where we're already seeing that there are big hits on manufacturing and also service sector slowing down, with consumers finding their real disposable incomes are being squeezed very severely. So once the savings that they have made during COVID disappear, they won't have an awful lot left to spend on other things. Mortgages are becoming so expensive, and the retail sector is already showing signs of discomfort. And what we're also seeing finally is a very substantial increase in the number of firms in difficulty. If that translates then to loads more places closing down, then unemployment will also rise. So 2024, a very uncertain period for the UK economy.
And one final question. On a global scale, if you could just give us your assessment of what might happen in 2024, please, Vicky.
The interesting thing about the forecasts that have come out from the major international organizations such as the IMF, the OECD, and so on, is that 24 will see growth of just under 3%. Under 3% is very, very slow. And of course, it shows loads of differences in regions. So you'll have the US do all right and China recovering a bit with special measures that the government there is putting in place, including cutting interest rates, which is quite good news, if you like, for growth in China. And maybe it will stimulate growth elsewhere. But overall, the forecast is a lot less than what we used to see in terms of global growth, and also real concerns about trade, that globalization is going into reverse, and that's bad news in terms of productivity in various parts of the world.
Well, let's look at what 2024 will bring for the people of Ukraine. I'm delighted to say I have with me Orysia Lutsavich from Chatham House, which is a think tank in London. Orysia, your predictions for Ukraine in 2024?
Well, predictions are very difficult, as we know it. The world really became unpredictable and unthinkable in many ways. But I expect the next year, 2024, will be more difficult for Ukraine. We have seen the first phase of the war, the first 2 years of repelling Russian aggression that had held the consolidated position of the West and quite strong resilience and resolve inside Ukraine to defeat the enemy and actually push Russia away. But in 2024, it will be much more difficult to master resources, to maintain the unity of the West with so many elections coming out. And also inside Ukraine, the country is, deeply wounded. It has lost a lot of men and women, but it remains unbroken, and it will continue as much as it can this fight, but it will be a difficult uphill struggle.
And there are, of course, elections in Russia in 2024. I would ask for a prediction, but we know who's going to win, don't we?
This is one of those things that is easy to predict because Russia is not a democracy. It is actually what Kremlin spokesperson called an expensive bureaucracy, where they have to stage these sham elections, which to a degree is the referendum on Putin. He needs this approval from his people, although, of course, to a large degree, it will be falsified because I think Russians are increasingly withdrawing from the politics because there's no politics as such. There's no challenger to President Putin. Although we see now the new civic campaign launched by Navalny called Russia Without Putin. It'd be interesting to see how much traction that gets in the society. I mean, elections are always the point of vulnerability and some kind of opportunity. And I am not excluding that this could cause some, turbulence and trouble for Putin's regime as it is overstretching, as it is mobilizing more and more people for war inside Ukraine.
And Arisia, do you think there's any prospect of peace talks in 2024?
I don't predict this is likely because two sides, both Ukraine and Russia, still believe they can achieve objectives on the battlefield. Also, it is something that Ukrainians find it difficult to negotiate with current Putin regime simply because there's no trust, simply because of all the war crimes that were committed. So Ukrainians will be holding the fort, trying to reclaim more territory and observe actually what happens within Russia, and when some new constellation of political forces may emerge that will be more willing to negotiate and compromise on the side of Russia.
And now on to the biggest conflict of the year, Gaza. I spoke to the Palestinian ambassador to Ireland, Dr. Gillan Abdelmajid, about her hopes for Gaza and Palestinian self-determination in 2024. What would you like to see for the Palestinian people?
I would like to see an end to the Israeli occupation and oppression. I wanted to see a free state of Palestine, live side by side in peace and security next to Israel. I wanted to see my people look for a better future in their free state, in their independent state on the 67 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital.
And what lies in store for Scotland? This from the former First Minister of Scotland, Alex Salmond. Alex, a huge year ahead, 2024. What's it going to bring for Scotland and politics in Scotland?
Well, I'm hoping that the Scottish politics will reassert itself and get back on the road to Scottish independence. But politics in general, people say to me, who's going to win the UK general election? Well, nobody's going to win it. It's a question of who's going to lose it the most. And Rishi Sunak's probably going to take the prize of losing the election. I think Labour, Keir Starmer, is going to win by default, not from anything he's doing, but by basically the incapacity of the Prime Minister to actually achieve anything. I mean, we've got a Prime Minister who thinks his greatest achievements are things he doesn't do. The population probably demands a bit more than that. So I don't think somebody's going to win the election. I think the Conservatives will lose it. I don't think they'll be able to fend it off to a year come January. I think that'd be running against the buffers. So it will be in the autumn, I suspect, and the Conservative Party will lose.
And what's your hope for Scotland in 2024?
Well, I hope that people who actually believe in independence will get back into positions of influence, because to solve Scotland's problems, to mobilise the natural resources of the country, particularly huge energy resources, you've got to have control of them. You've got to take charge of them so that you can end the disgraceful situation this winter of having fuel poverty in a land of energy plenty. That is a national scandal which should be addressed by having control of Scotland's own resources.
We turn now to predictions on the year ahead for the British royal family. We heard from Paul Burrell. He's the former butler to the late Princess of Wales, and the journalist Afia Hagan. Afia, all eyes on the House of Windsor in 2024. What do you think we will see from Charles and co?
I think we're going to see much more of the Prince and Princess of Wales stepping up and getting ready to be King and Queen one day. And I also think we're going to see the royals fanned out across the Commonwealth and Commonwealth realm countries to try and do like a goodwill tour and get some good PR in there. So lots more travel and lots more Catherine and William and the kids.
Paul, your reading of what we can expect from the royals in Britain in 2024?
I think much of the same as we've just witnessed, but I agree with the fire. I think much more of the Prince and Princess of Wales deputising for the King and Queen, especially on long visits around the Commonwealth. So look out, William and Kate, you'll pack your bags for Australia and Canada. And I think it's a great year for the royals. We will hear more from the Sussexes as they plan their future. So this battle isn't over yet.
And that's our 2024 prediction show for you. Remember, you can keep up with us online at trtworld.com and on our YouTube channel. Until next week, from the whole team on Roundtable and me, Enda Brady, goodbye.